The gunshot echoed through the valley like thunder, sending a flock of startled crows into the crimson sky of 1876. Quinn Ellsworth cursed under his breath as the wounded coyote disappeared into the brush, leaving only a trail of blood droplets on the dusty ground. His ranch outside Oregon City, Oregon Territory, was suffering livestock disappearing, crops failing, and now his shot had gone wide. Standing alone in the vast emptiness that had once been his father's dream, Quinn removed his hat and wiped sweat from his brow, unaware that miles away, a woman with emerald eyes and a will of iron was packing her belongings, about to change his life forever. Zachary Ellsworth had built this ranch from nothing, raising his son to be just as stubborn and self-reliant. Now, 3 years after his father's death, Quinn was watching it all slip away. The drought had lasted 2 seasons, cattle prices were falling, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. At 32, Quinn had never learned to ask for help, a trait that had kept him alive but lonely. "Come on, Rusty," he called to his chestnut mare. "Let's check the north pasture before dark." As they rode, Quinn surveyed the parched land with a critical eye. The creek that divided his property was barely a trickle now, and the grass that remained was yellowed and sparse. Rusty's hooves kicked up clouds of dust with every step. "Not much to look at anymore, is it, girl?" he murmured, patting the horse's neck. The ranch house came into view as the sun dipped below the mountains. It was a solid 2-story structure, weathered by decades of harsh winters and scorching summers. The porch sagged slightly on one side, another job Quinn hadn't found time to fix. A lone lantern burned in the window, his foreman Hector's signal that dinner was waiting. "Beans again?" Quinn asked as he entered the kitchen, the scent of bacon and cornbread making his stomach growl. Hector Domings, a wiry Mexican who'd worked for Quinn's father for 20 years, grinned. "With extra pepper, just how you hate it," Quinn chuckled, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. "Any news from town?" Mail came. "Bank notice, didn't open it." Hector nodded toward an envelope on the table. "And Billy Jenkins says 3 more families left for California last week." Quinn opened the envelope, scanned the contents, then crumpled it in his fist. "They're giving me 30 days. Hector's expression darkened. "Maybe time to consider Horace Miller's offer to sell for half what this place is worth." "Never." Quinn tossed the paper into the fire. "We'll find a way." The 2 men ate in silence, the weight of their predicament hanging heavy in the air. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the cracks in the walls like a mournful spirit. 200 miles away in Portland, Zara Wilson closed the lid of her trunk with finality. The small apartment she'd shared with her late husband Thomas felt suffocating now, filled with memories of a life cut tragically short. At 26, she was a widow with nothing left but debts and her husband's unfinished dreams. "Are you certain about this, Zara?" Her sister-in-law Rebecca asked, concern etching her features. "Oregon City is barely more than a frontier town. What will you do there?" Zara tucked a stray lock of auburn hair behind her ear. "Thomas's cousin wrote that they need teachers desperately. The position includes living quarters above the schoolhouse." She straightened her shoulders. "I need a fresh start, Becca, somewhere I can be useful." Rebecca sighed, helping Zara secure the trunk's straps. "Thomas would want you to be happy, not exiled to some dust bowl." "I'll be fine," Zara insisted, though uncertainty fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. "The stagecoach leaves at dawn. I should try to sleep." But sleep eluded her. Instead, she sat by the window, watching Portland's streets grow quiet as night descended. 6 months had passed since influenza had taken Thomas, leaving her alone with his medical school debts and shattered plans. Teaching had been her profession before marriage. Now it would be her salvation. As dawn broke, Zara found herself boarding the stagecoach, her worldly possessions reduced to 2 trunks and a carpet bag. The journey would take days, traversing rugged terrain and small settlements before reaching Oregon City. As the coach lurched forward, she caught a final glimpse of the city that had been her home, then resolutely turned her gaze toward the horizon and whatever fate awaited her. The stagecoach bounced mercilessly over rutted trails, carrying Zara and 3 other passengers westward. A traveling salesman with a perpetual smile. an elderly woman returning to her son's homestead, and a nervous young man clutching legal documents made up her traveling companions. The days blurred together in a haze of dust, brief stops at way stations, and endless stretches of magnificent, untamed countryside. "First time to Oregon City, madam?" the salesman asked on their third day, offering her a piece of jerky from his provisions. "Yes, though my late husband spoke of it often. His cousin settled there years ago," Zara replied, accepting the dried meat gratefully. "Fine place, growing every year. Not Portland, mind you, but decent folk mostly." He leaned closer. "Though I'd watch yourself. These territories attract those looking for second chances, some deserving, some not." Zara nodded, having already considered this. "I've been hired as the schoolteacher. I expect that will provide some standing in the community." The old woman across from her cackled. "Teacher, is it? Good luck with them wild ranch boys." Last one lasted half a term before running back east with her tail between her legs. "I'm not easily frightened," Zara said, more confidently than she felt on the morning of the fifth day. The driver called out, "Oregon City ahead." Zara peered through the dusty window as the stagecoach descended into a valley nestled along the Willamette River. The town wasn't large, perhaps 40 buildings arranged along a main street, with houses and farms scattered across the surrounding countryside. A church steeple rose prominently from the center, and several commercial buildings clustered near the river docks. The coach rolled to a stop outside the Oregon City Hotel, a two-story wooden structure with a wide porch. As Zara stepped down, stretching her cramped limbs, a portly man in a bowler hat approached. "Mrs. Wilson, Edwin Carpenter, head of the school board." He pumped her hand enthusiastically. "Welcome to Oregon City. We're mighty pleased you've come. Been without proper schooling for 3 months now." "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Carpenter," Zara replied, trying to brush the travel dust from her skirts. "I'm eager to get settled. Of course, my wife's prepared lunch, then we'll show you to the schoolhouse. Term starts Monday. 37 students ranging from 5 to 16 years. Rough bunch, but good hearts mostly." As they walked down the main street, Zara took in her new home. A general store, blacksmith, 2 saloons, a small bank, and various other establishments lined the thoroughfare. People paused in their activities to study her. The new schoolteacher was clearly an event of interest in a town this size. "That's Quinn Ellsworth." Carpenter nodded toward a tall figure loading supplies into a wagon. "Runs the big ranch north of town, stubborn as they come but fair." His father was one of the founders. Zara glimpsed a broad-shouldered man in a dust-coated duster, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Something in his stance, isolated, self-contained, caught her attention before he mounted his horse and rode out of town without a backward glance. After a hearty meal at the carpenter's home, Edwin drove Zara to the schoolhouse at the edge of town. It was a simple one-room building with large windows and a bell tower. Behind it stretched a playground area, currently overgrown with weeds. "Living quarters are upstairs," Edwin explained, unlocking the door. "Basic but private, pump out back for water, outhouse too. Town ladies took up a collection to stock your pantry to start." The classroom was dusty but well-built, with rows of desks facing a teacher's platform. A blackboard covered one wall and bookshelves sadly understocked lined another. A narrow staircase led to her quarters. One large room serving as bedroom and sitting area, a tiny kitchen alcove, and a space for bathing behind a curtain. "It's perfect," Zara said, though her heart sank at the sparseness. "School board meeting tomorrow evening at the church. You can meet everyone then." Edwin shuffled awkwardly. "Town's growing, Mrs. Wilson. Needed a teacher bad. Most folks appreciate that you've come, but... Some think a widow woman living alone isn't proper, just so you're prepared." Zara lifted her chin. "I assure you, Mr. Carpenter, my conduct will be above reproach. My focus is educating the children of Oregon City, nothing else." After he left, Zara sat on the narrow bed and finally allowed tears to fall. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her alone in a strange town, surrounded by wilderness, tasked with taming children who had likely run off the previous teacher. But crying wouldn't change her circumstances. She wiped her eyes, unpacked her meager belongings, and began sweeping the dusty floor of what was now her home. The next morning brought Quinn Ellsworth back to town earlier than he'd planned. A broken plow part needed replacement, and with planting season approaching, if the rains ever came, every day counted. "Morning, Quinn," called Samuel Green from the smithy. "Heard the new schoolteacher arrived yesterday. Pretty little thing, they say." Quinn nodded noncommittally, tying Rusty to the hitching post outside the general store. "Hope she lasts longer than the last one. My ranch hand's kids need proper learning." Inside, Quinn handed his list to Walter Barnes, the shopkeeper. As Walter gathered the supplies, the bell above the door jingled and a woman entered. Quinn paid her little mind until Walter's voice took on an unusually courteous tone. "Mrs. Wilson, welcome. How are you settling in?" Quinn turned, curious despite himself. The woman was younger than he'd expected, perhaps mid-20s, with striking auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat. Her dress was simple but well-made, dusty from the walk into town. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, bright green and direct, meeting his gaze without wavering when Walter made introductions. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Quinn Ellsworth, one of our local ranchers." "Mr. Ellsworth," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Madam." Quinn touched the brim of his hat. "Welcome to Oregon City." "Thank you. I understand you have children attending the school." "Not mine, madam. Some of my hands have youngsters who will be in your classroom." She smiled, a professional expression that didn't quite reach those remarkable eyes. "I look forward to meeting them on Monday. If you'll excuse me, I need to purchase supplies for the classroom." As she moved away, Walter leaned across the counter. "Widow woman from Portland. Husband died of influenza. Seems capable enough, but school teaching out here isn't like back east." Quinn grunted noncommittally, but found his gaze following her as she moved efficiently through the store, consulting a list. There was a determined set to her shoulders that suggested she might have more backbone than the last teacher. A nervous girl who'd fled after the Jenkins twins filled her desk drawer with garter snakes. Outside, Quinn was loading his supplies when he noticed Mrs. Wilson struggling with her packages. Good manners compelled him to approach. "Allow me to help you with those, madam." She hesitated, then smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Ellsworth. I may have been overambitious in my purchasing." They walked in silence toward the schoolhouse, Quinn carrying the heavier parcels while she balanced a smaller bundle. He noticed she kept pace easily, undeterred by the dusty road or the curious stares of townsfolk. "You've taught before?" he asked as they approached the schoolhouse. "In Portland, yes, 3 years before I married." She glanced sideways at him. "I understand the position has been difficult to fill." Quinn's mouth quirked. "Oregon City children can be spirited. Children everywhere are spirited, Mr. Ellsworth. They merely need proper guidance and engagement." She unlocked the schoolhouse door. "You can set those inside, thank you." The classroom was transformed from the dusty room he remembered. Desks had been arranged in neat rows, windows cleaned to brilliance, fresh chalk on the board. A map of the United States hung on one wall and wildflowers brightened the teacher's desk. "You've been busy," he observed. "There's much still to do," she replied, setting down her parcels. "The library is woefully inadequate and the playground needs attention before someone breaks an ankle." "Folks around here are used to making do with less, Mrs. Wilson." Something flashed in her eyes, a spark of defiance. "That doesn't mean they should have to, Mr. Ellsworth, particularly where education is concerned." Quinn found himself intrigued by this widow woman who spoke her mind so plainly. Most newcomers to Oregon City were intimidated by the ruggedness of frontier life, but Zara Wilson seemed determined to impose her standards rather than lower them. "Well, good luck to you, madam." He turned to leave. "Mr. Ellsworth," her voice stopped him at the door. "Thank you for your assistance. I hope to see your ranch hand's children on Monday." He nodded and departed, oddly unsettled by the encounter. On the ride back to the ranch, he found himself thinking of those green eyes and wondering how long she would last in a town that chewed up and spat out those who couldn't adapt to its harsh realities. The school board meeting that evening was a tense affair. Zara faced a semicircle of the town's prominent citizens, most looking skeptical of the slender woman before them. Curriculum should focus on practical matters, insisted Bernard Jenkins, a weathered cattle rancher. Reading, writing, ciphering, none of that poetry and philosophy nonsense. These kids need skills for survival, not fancy ideas. I assure you, Mr. Jenkins, the fundamentals will be well covered, Zara replied calmly, but I believe all children benefit from exposure to literature and ideas beyond their immediate experience. It broadens their horizons. Horizons are plenty broad out here already, someone muttered, drawing chuckles. Mabel Carpenter, Edwin's wife, came to her defense. I for one am pleased to have someone of Mrs. Wilson's education and refinement teaching our children. Portland schools are known for their quality. The discussion continued, with Zara holding her ground on academic standards while acknowledging the practical needs of frontier children. By meeting's end, she had won grudging acceptance from most board members, though Bernard Jenkins remained openly doubtful. Just don't go filling their heads with notions that'll make them dissatisfied with life here, he warned as they departed. Oregon City needs farmers and ranchers, not poets and dreamers. Monday morning arrived with a crystalline sky and Zara's stomach in knots. She rang the school bell precisely at 8 o'clock, then stood on the steps watching children emerge from various directions. They came on foot, on horseback, in farm wagons, a motley assortment of ages and backgrounds. Most eyed her warily as they filed into the classroom. The day was a battle from the start. The older boys tested her authority with whispered comments and feigned incomprehension. Younger children, taking cues from their elders, giggled and fidgeted. By noon, Zara's head pounded, and she'd resorted to separating 3 children to corners for disruption. During the lunch break, she stood on the schoolhouse steps, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The sight of Quinn Ellsworth riding past, glancing curiously at the chaotic playground, only heightened her determination. She would not fail, not on her first day, not in front of the town, and certainly not in front of that man with his assessing gaze. The afternoon went marginally better after she confiscated a frog from Billy Jenkins' pocket and assigned immediate consequences for misbehavior. By dismissal time, she'd established tentative order, though her voice was hoarse and her patience threadbare. As children scattered homeward, she noticed a girl of about 7 lingering near the steps, scuffing her worn boots in the dust. "Hello there," Zara said gently. "Aren't you Sophia Domings?" The child nodded, dark eyes serious in her round face. "Yes, madam." "Is someone coming to walk home with you?" "Papa works at Ellsworth Ranch. It's far, but I know the way." She hesitated. "Teacher, I liked your story today, the one about the rabbit." Zara smiled, her first genuine smile of the day. "Thank you, Sophia. Would you like to borrow the book?" "You can return it tomorrow." The girl's face lit up. "Really, I'll be very careful with it." "I know you will." Zara retrieved the volume of children's tales, watching as Sophia clutched it reverently. "Now, are you sure you'll be all right walking home alone?" "I do it every day," Sophia said with the pragmatism of frontier children. Still, Zara watched until the child's small figure disappeared down the dusty road, then turned back to her empty classroom with a sigh. One connection made, dozens more to forge. The days fell into a pattern. Mornings teaching, afternoons preparing lessons and grading assignments, evenings alone in her sparse quarters. Gradually, the children tested her less and listened more. She introduced them to mathematics through practical applications like measuring field dimensions, and geography through stories of distant lands. Each morning, she rang the bell. Each afternoon, she watched Sophia Domings begin her long walk to Ellsworth Ranch. And each week, she saw Quinn Ellsworth in town, their exchanges limited to polite nods until the 3rd Saturday after her arrival. Zara was in the general store, purchasing supplies, when raised voices drew her attention to the back of the shop. "The price is fair, Ellsworth," Walter Barnes was saying. "Droughts affected everyone. Flowers up 30% from Denver." "It's highway robbery," Quinn replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "How am I supposed to feed my men at these prices? The bank's breathing down my neck as it is. Take it up with the railroad, not me. I'm barely staying afloat myself." Zara pretended absorption in selecting writing paper. but couldn't help noticing the rigid set of Quinn's shoulders as he grudgingly counted out money for a fraction of the supplies he'd apparently intended to purchase. Later, as she left the store, she found him loading his wagon, his movements sharp with frustration. "Mr. Ellsworth," she greeted him. He glanced up, barely acknowledging her before returning to his task. "Mrs. Wilson." Sophia Domings is making excellent progress with her reading. She's quite bright. This caught his attention. Hector's girl, good, he sets store by education, though he had precious little himself. She has a long walk each day. I worry about her in bad weather. Quinn secured a crate in the wagon bed. "Life's full of long walks out here, Mrs. Wilson." Something in his dismissive tone sparked her temper. "Yes, I'm becoming quite aware of the hardships people consider normal here. That doesn't mean they're necessary or should be accepted without question." He turned to face her fully, sunlight illuminating eyes the color of a stormy sky. "You've been here, 3 weeks, and already you're an expert on what Oregon City needs." "I didn't claim expertise, merely observation." Children walking miles alone, families struggling with basic necessities while too proud to acknowledge difficulties, these seem like problems that could be addressed through community effort. "Community effort," he repeated, a hint of mockery in his tone. "Frontier life requires self-reliance, Mrs. Wilson. People help themselves. And when they can't, when circumstances beyond their control like drought or illness overwhelm them," his jaw tightened, "then they find a way or they fail. That's the reality out here." A rather harsh philosophy. A realistic one. He climbed onto the wagon seat. "Good day, Mrs. Wilson." Zara watched him drive away, irritation and something else, something more complicated, churning inside her. The man was insufferable in his stubborn self-reliance, yet she'd glimpsed genuine concern when she mentioned Sophia, and his anger in the store seemed born of responsibility toward his workers rather than selfishness. Quinn Ellsworth was a puzzle, and despite her better judgment, Zara found herself curious to solve it. Spring advanced into early summer, the drought continuing unabated. The creek on Quinn's property dwindled to a series of stagnant pools. Cattle grew gaunt on inadequate pasture, and tension among the ranchers increased as water sources became precious commodities. "Rivers down 3 feet from last year," Hector reported one evening as they ate. "Jenkins is talking about damming the creek where it enters his property." Quinn set down his fork. "He can't do that. Water rights are clear that creek serves 4 ranches. He says first rights go to whoever's land the water crosses first." Hector shook his head. "There's going to be trouble, patron. I'll ride over tomorrow, talk some sense into him." Quinn rubbed his temples where a headache had taken up permanent residence. The bank's deadline loomed, and without rain, his options dwindled daily. "Sophia says the teacher asked about our water situation," Hector mentioned casually. "She's organizing the children to learn about conservation methods." Quinn frowned. "Mrs. Wilson should stick to reading and arithmetic." "She's been good for Sophia. Girl talks of nothing else but school now." Hector studied his employer. "Teacher asks about you sometimes. Does she now?" Quinn kept his tone neutral, though something fluttered in his chest. "Asks how the ranch is faring in the drought. If we need anything." "Tell her we're managing just fine without her concern," Quinn said sharply, then regretted his tone when Hector's expression closed. "I'm riding into town tomorrow after I see Jenkins. Need anything? Coffee, if you can get it cheaper than Barnes is charging." Hector hesitated. "And maybe stop by the school. Sophia's class is putting on some kind of presentation. She'd be proud if you came." Quinn sighed, unable to refuse his foreman this simple request. "All right. What time?" The next morning found Quinn facing Bernard Jenkins across the older man's kitchen table, negotiations already deteriorating. "Water law's on my side, Ellsworth," Jenkins insisted, his leathery face set in stubborn lines. "My property, my creek." "That's not how water rights work, and you know it," Quinn countered. "That creek has served all our ranches for 30 years. Damming it now would ruin everyone downstream." "Should have thought of that before letting your father's ranch go to seed," Jenkins said with calculated cruelty. "Everyone knows you're one missed payment from foreclosure. Maybe it's time fresh blood took over that land." Quinn's hands curled into fists beneath the table. Is that what this is about? Forcing me to sell, Jenkins shrugged. Business is business. Horace Miller's offering good money for adjoining properties. With your water rights in question, your land value drops considerably. You're playing a dangerous game, Bernard, Quinn said quietly, rising from the table. That dam goes up, it won't stand long. Is that a threat? It's a promise that this community won't stand for one man hoarding what's always been shared. Quinn settled his hat on his head. Think carefully before you make enemies of your neighbors. He rode away seething, the confrontation having gone exactly as he'd feared. The drought was bringing out the worst in people, desperation breeding betrayal. His father would have known how to handle Jenkins. Zachary Ellsworth had a gift for making men see reason without resorting to threats. It was a talent Quinn had never acquired, preferring direct action to diplomacy. By the time he reached Oregon City, his mood was dark. The school presentation had completely slipped his mind until he passed the schoolhouse and saw parents and townspeople filing inside. Cursing under his breath, he tied Rusty to the hitching post and reluctantly joined them. The classroom had been transformed. Desks pushed back, children arranged at the front, drawings and maps decorating the walls. Quinn slipped into the back just as Zara Wilson called for attention. Welcome, everyone. Today, our students will share what they've learned about water conservation techniques from around the world and how these might be applied to our own community during this drought. Quinn's eyebrows rose as, one by one, children presented information on irrigation systems from ancient Egypt, water collection methods from desert communities, and crop rotation strategies to preserve soil moisture. Sophia Domings, nearly vibrating with excitement, explained how the ancient Pueblo people had constructed check dams to slow water flow and prevent erosion. Mr. Ellsworth's ranch could use these on the steep parts where the creek runs fast, she concluded, pointing to her careful drawing. Then the water would stay longer instead of rushing away. All eyes turned to Quinn, including Zara Wilson's. He managed a tight smile and nod at Sophia, whose face lit up at his acknowledgement. After the presentation, children proudly showed their parents the displays they'd created. Quinn found himself cornered by Sophia, who insisted on explaining her drawing in greater detail. He crouched to her level, genuinely impressed by the child's understanding. This is excellent work, Sophia. Did you come up with this idea yourself? Mrs. Wilson helped me find a book about it. She says sometimes old ideas are the best ideas because they've been tested by time. The girl beamed. Do you think it would work on your ranch? It might at that, Quinn admitted, studying the diagram. My father says the creek is almost dry now, Sophia continued worriedly. He says without rain the cattle will suffer. Your father shouldn't burden you with such concerns, came Zara's voice from behind them. She smiled at Sophia. Why don't you show Mrs. Jenkins your work on desert plants? I believe she's looking for you. When the child scampered off, Zara turned to Quinn, her expression cooling. I'm surprised to see you here, Mr. Ellsworth. Hector mentioned it was important to Sophia. He straightened, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. Interesting presentation. Though I wonder if teaching children about water management falls within the school curriculum. Education should be relevant to students' lives, she replied evenly. The drought affects every family here. Understanding it gives children some sense of control in a frightening situation. Before Quinn could respond, Bernard Jenkins approached, his expression thunderous. What's the meaning of this, Mrs. Wilson? My boy comes home talking about communal water rights and shared resources. That's not education, that's propaganda. Zara faced him calmly. It's history, geography, and science, Mr. Jenkins. Nothing more. It's meddling in matters that don't concern you, Jenkins snapped, loud enough that nearby conversations halted. Next you'll have them questioning property rights and inheritance laws. I'll have them questioning everything, sir. That's what education does, Zara replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. Children who don't question become adults who don't think. Jenkins' face reddened. The school board will hear about this. We hired you to teach basics, not fill their heads with troublemaking ideas. To Quinn's surprise, he found himself stepping forward. The children presented facts, Bernard, not opinions. If facts threaten you, perhaps the problem isn't with the teacher. Jenkins' glare shifted between them. Sticking up for her, Ellsworth? Interesting, considering what we discussed this morning. Maybe you two are in cahoots. What does that mean? Zara asked. It means Mr. Jenkins is planning to dam the creek that serves 4 ranches, including mine, Quinn explained, watching her expression shift from confusion to understanding. Apparently, he thinks water that's flowed freely for generations suddenly belongs exclusively to him. That's a simplified version, Jenkins sputtered. Is it? Or is it exactly what you intend, hoping to force distressed properties onto the market for your friend Horace Miller to snatch up? Quinn's voice remained level, but those nearby could feel the tension crackling between the men. This isn't the place, Jenkins hissed, glancing around at the watching families. I agree, Zara interjected. This is a school celebration. Take your disagreement elsewhere, gentlemen. Jenkins stormed out while Quinn remained suddenly aware of his public confrontation. Parents gradually resumed conversations, though with an undercurrent of unease. Property disputes over water were becoming common throughout the region, sometimes turning violent. Thank you, Zara said quietly, for defending the lesson. Quinn shrugged. Jenkins needed deflating. Had nothing to do with the lesson. Of course. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Well, don't let me keep you, Mr. Ellsworth. I'm sure you have important matters to attend to. He recognized the dismissal and felt oddly disappointed by it. Mrs. Wilson, about the creek situation, it's none of my business, as Mr. Jenkins so clearly stated. She turned away to speak with approaching parents, effectively ending their conversation. Quinn left the schoolhouse unsettled, his thoughts a jumble of concerns: the ranch, the bank deadline, Jenkins' damn threat. And now, inexplicably, the look of disappointment in Zara Wilson's eyes when he dismissed her lesson's value. He was halfway to the general store when he realized he'd completely forgotten Hector's coffee. Zara closed the schoolhouse door behind the last visitors, exhaustion washing over her. The presentation had been largely successful, but the confrontation between Quinn and Bernard Jenkins cast a shadow over the day's achievements. Slumping into her chair, she massaged her temples where a headache threatened. The schoolroom door opened, startling her. Quinn Ellsworth stood in the entrance, hat in hand. Mr. Ellsworth, did you forget something? I wanted to apologize for Jenkins' behavior, he said stiffly, and for bringing ranch disputes into your classroom. That's hardly necessary. You weren't the one making accusations. She studied him curiously. Though I'm surprised to see you back, he shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Sophia's work, the check dam idea, it has merit. I'd like to know more about it. Zara blinked, then rose and crossed to the bookshelf. There's a chapter on indigenous water management here. She pulled down a volume. You're welcome to borrow it. Quinn accepted the book cautiously, as if it might bite. Much obliged. An awkward silence fell between them. Zara found herself noticing details about him: the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the calloused hands that held her book with unexpected gentleness. Is it true, about your ranch? She asked finally, his expression shuddered. Town gossip travels fast. Oregon City isn't large, Mr. Ellsworth. People talk, especially about established families like yours, he sighed, turning the book over in his hands. Yes, it's true. The bank's deadline is approaching, and without rain. He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. But we'll manage, always have. Even if it means fighting neighbors over water rights, if necessary. His jaw set stubbornly. That land has been in my family for 2 generations. I won't be the one to lose it. Zara hesitated, then said quietly, Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, Mr. Ellsworth. It's wisdom. His eyes met hers, stormy and conflicted. We don't need help, Mrs. Wilson. The Ellsworth Ranch stands on its own. Then let me help without asking, she replied impulsively, gesturing toward the book. Information requires no permission to be useful. Something shifted in his expression: surprise, perhaps, or reluctant admiration. You're a stubborn woman, Mrs. Wilson, so I've been told, frequently. She smiled slightly. Good evening, Mr. Ellsworth. I hope you find the book informative. After he left, Zara remained still, trying to understand the strange tension that had developed between them. Quinn Ellsworth embodied everything that frustrated her about frontier mentality: the stubborn self-reliance, the resistance to change, the pride that bordered on self-destruction. Yet she couldn't deny a growing fascination with the man behind the gruff exterior, the rancher fighting to preserve his heritage against mounting odds. It was a dangerous interest for a woman in her position. As the schoolteacher, her behavior must remain beyond reproach. A widow showing too much interest in a bachelor, regardless of circumstances, would trigger gossip that could undermine her authority in the classroom. Still, as she prepared for bed that night, Zara found herself hoping Quinn would actually read the book rather than setting it aside as a gesture of politeness. Something told her that beneath his rugged independence lay a mind more flexible than he allowed others to see. 2 days later, dark clouds finally gathered over Oregon City. The townspeople watched the sky anxiously, hope and skepticism mingling as thunder rumbled in the distance. Zara dismissed her students early when the first fat drops began to fall, sending them running homeward with whoops of excitement. She stood on the schoolhouse porch, watching rain transform the dusty street into mud within minutes. The downpour intensified, drumming on the roof and drenching anyone foolish enough to remain outdoors. Zara stepped back under the overhang, hugging herself against the sudden chill while savoring the sweet scent of rain-soaked earth. Movement caught her eye: a rider approaching at a gallop, seemingly heedless of the deluge. As he drew closer, she recognized Quinn, hatless and soaked to the skin, his expression one of pure elation. He reined in before the schoolhouse, water streaming from his hair and clothing. "Mrs. Wilson." He called over the storm's roar. "Your book." Zara stared at him in confusion. "Mr. Ellsworth, you're drenched. What about my book?" "The check dams." He gestured expansively toward the hills. "We built 3 yesterday, just like Sophia's drawing showed. They're working holding water instead of letting it run off. The creek will flow for weeks longer because of it." His enthusiasm was infectious, his usual reserve washed away by rain and success. Zara found herself laughing, sharing his joy despite the absurdity of the moment. "That's wonderful. But surely this downpour would have helped regardless." "Yes, but now we'll capture 10 times the benefit." He dismounted, leading his horse under the overhang. "I came to return your book and to thank you and Sophia. That child has a future as a water engineer if she wants it." He held out the volume, now protected inside his jacket. Their fingers brushed as she took it, sending an unexpected warmth through her despite the chill air. "You're soaked through," she observed. "You shouldn't ride back in this storm. It could turn dangerous." Quinn glanced at the darkening sky, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. "I don't want to impose." "Nonsense, at least wait until the worst passes." Zara made a swift decision. "Come upstairs, I have coffee and you can dry by the stove." His hesitation was palpable. A bachelor entering a widow's private quarters, even with innocent intentions, would set tongues wagging throughout Oregon City. But another crack of lightning decided the matter, making his horse sidestep nervously. "Just until the storm eases," he agreed, tethering the animal under the porch roof. Zara led him up the narrow staircase to her living quarters, suddenly self-conscious about the modest space. A small stove provided heat, a table with 2 chairs served for dining and lesson preparation, and a curtained alcove concealed her bed. Books, her most valued possessions, filled every available surface. "It's not much," she said, busying herself with stoking the fire. "It's neat as a pin," Quinn replied, standing awkwardly near the door, water pooling beneath his boots. "More books than I've seen outside a proper library." "Books were my husband's passion. He was studying medicine when—" She trailed off, pouring water into the coffee pot. "You should remove your coat at least. It's dripping everywhere." Quinn complied, hanging the sodden garment on a peg near the stove. His shirt clung to broad shoulders, and he ran a hand through wet hair in a futile attempt at tidiness. The domesticity of the moment struck Zara suddenly. This man in her private space, rain lashing the windows, coffee brewing on the stove. It felt both improper and strangely right. "You must think me half mad, riding through this weather to return a book," Quinn said, breaking the silence. "I think you were excited about your success with the check dams," she replied, setting 2 cups on the table. Enthusiasm often overrides good judgment. Something I've been accused of lacking enthusiasm, not judgment. He smiled slightly, accepting the coffee she offered. My father used to say I was born serious. And was he right? Quinn considered this. Mostly, running a ranch doesn't leave much room for frivolity. Responsibility came early. There's a difference between being responsible and being isolated, Zara observed, then immediately regretted her forthrightness. I'm sorry, that was presumptuous. To her surprise, Quinn didn't bristle. No, there's truth in it. After my mother died, father withdrew into himself. I learned from his example. He stared into his cup. It's an effective way to avoid disappointment. And joy, Zara said softly. Their eyes met across the small table, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred experiences. Loss had shaped them both, though they'd responded differently. Quinn had armored himself against further hurt, while Zara had sought new connections, new purpose. The moment stretched, intimate and charged, until a particularly violent thunderclap broke the spell. Quinn cleared his throat and rose to check the weather through the window. The storm's moving east, he said. I should go before the creek rises too high. Zara nodded, both relieved and disappointed at the return to practicality. Of course, your men will be wondering where you are. Hector knows I went to town. He hesitated, then added, I'd be obliged if you didn't mention my visit here. People might misinterpret. I understand, Zara said quickly. Your reputation is safe with me, Mr. Ellsworth. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I was more concerned about yours, Mrs. Wilson. A schoolteacher must be above reproach, as I recall you saying. Indeed. She handed him his still damp coat. Thank you for returning the book. I'm glad it proved useful. At the door, Quinn paused. The check dams were just the beginning. That book has other ideas worth trying. Would you? Would it be presumptuous to ask to borrow it again, or perhaps discuss some of the concepts with you? Zara's heart quickened at the unexpected request. Not at all. Knowledge should be shared, especially when it might benefit the community. Sunday after church, a walk perhaps? He seemed almost boyish in his uncertainty. To discuss water conservation, of course. Of course, she agreed, fighting a smile. Water conservation is a serious topic deserving thorough examination. This time his smile reached his eyes, transforming his features from handsome to breathtaking. Until Sunday, then. Zara watched from the window as he rode away, the rain reduced to a gentle patter. She touched her cheeks, finding them warm despite the room's chill. A simple conversation about books and dams shouldn't leave her feeling so unsettled, so aware of herself as a woman rather than a teacher or widow. Yet as she prepared her evening meal, Zara found herself anticipating Sunday with an eagerness she hadn't felt in a very long time. The rain continued intermittently for 3 days, soaking the parched earth and bringing cautious optimism to Oregon City. Creeks rose, pastures greened, and spirits lifted throughout the community. On Quinn's ranch, the check dams performed exactly as promised, creating small reservoirs that would extend the creek's flow long after the rain stopped. Like magic, Hector said, surveying their handiwork. The old people's knew things we've forgotten. Quinn nodded, satisfaction warming him despite the damp chill. The book mentions similar structures in Spain and North Africa. Apparently, desert dwellers worldwide developed comparable solutions. Hector gave him a curious look. You've been reading quite a bit lately, patron. Knowledge is a tool like any other, Quinn replied, avoiding his foreman's knowing gaze. He hadn't mentioned his conversation with Zara Wilson in her quarters, nor his impulsive invitation for Sunday. Such matters were private, especially given the uncertain nature of his feelings. Saturday brought Quinn to town for supplies, the general store buzzing with talk of the rainfall's effects. He was examining seed prices when Bernard Jenkins entered, accompanied by Horace Miller, a corpulent businessman whose recent arrival in Oregon City had coincided with aggressive land acquisition attempts. Ellsworth, Jenkins acknowledged coldly. Heard your creeks flowing again. Convenient timing. Nature's timing, not mine, Quinn replied evenly, though the check dams are helping considerably. Check dams? Miller inquired, his small eyes gleaming with interest. Simple water retention structures, indigenous technology, actually. Quinn couldn't resist adding, "My foreman's daughter learned about them in school. Mrs. Wilson has been teaching practical applications of history." Jenkins' expression soured at the schoolteacher's mention. That woman's becoming a nuisance, filling children's heads with ideas above their station. "Education is everyone's station," came Zara's voice from the adjacent aisle. She stepped into view, parcels in hand. "Good morning, gentlemen." Quinn felt an unexpected leap of pleasure at her appearance. She wore a simple blue dress, her auburn hair neatly coiled beneath a modest hat, yet something about her presence commanded attention. He noted with satisfaction that both Jenkins and Miller straightened unconsciously. "Mrs. Wilson," Miller said, attempting gallantry. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Horace Miller at your service, Mr. Miller. I've heard your name mentioned in connection with various land purchases." Her tone remained perfectly polite, though Quinn detected a hint of coolness. "Business opportunities abound in growing communities," Miller replied smoothly. "Speaking of which, I understand you've been teaching alternative water management techniques. Fascinating subject. The children find it relevant to their daily lives," Zara said. "Especially those from ranching families. Indeed, indeed. Perhaps you'd consider giving a presentation to our business association. Such knowledge could benefit the entire community." Before Zara could respond, Jenkins interrupted. "What Horace means is that information like that belongs in community discussion, not just classrooms where it might be misapplied." Quinn bristled at the implication. "Afraid of children learning too much, Bernard. Afraid of outside influences disrupting established practices," Jenkins retorted. "Mrs. Wilson hasn't been here long enough to understand our ways. Perhaps your ways could benefit from fresh perspectives," Zara suggested mildly, "particularly when facing challenges like prolonged drought." Miller laughed nervously. Now, we're all neighbors here. Bernard, why don't we continue our discussion at the hotel? Mrs. Wilson, do consider my invitation. Good day to you both." As they departed, Quinn couldn't help but chuckle at Jenkins' thunderous expression. "You handled them masterfully." "Teaching requires diplomacy," Zara replied, though her eyes sparkled with suppressed amusement. "Though I suspect I've made an enemy of Mr. Jenkins. Join the club." Quinn glanced around, noting several customers watching them with undisguised interest. "May I carry your packages? I'm heading back past the schoolhouse." They walked together through Oregon City's muddy Main Street, conversation flowing more easily than Quinn had expected. Zara described her students' excitement about the rain, while he updated her on the Czech Dam's performance. Townspeople nodded greetings as they passed, curiosity evident in their expressions. By the time they reached the schoolhouse, Quinn was acutely aware that their public appearance together would fuel speculation. "Are we still meeting tomorrow?" he asked quietly as she unlocked the door. "After church," Zara hesitated, then nodded. "Unless you've reconsidered." "Not at all." He handed her the packages. "Until tomorrow, then." As he walked away, Quinn felt lighter somehow, as if some burden had shifted. The ranch's problems remained, the bank deadline still loomed, and one rainfall wouldn't restore a year's drought damage, but for the first time in months, possibility rather than despair colored his thoughts. Sunday's church service seemed interminable to Quinn, who found his attention wandering repeatedly to the neat figure seated several pews ahead. Zara wore a green dress that complemented her eyes, her hair arranged more elaborately than usual beneath a small hat. He wasn't the only one who noticed throughout the service. Gazes shifted between them, connections being drawn, assumptions made. By the final hymn, Quinn had decided their planned walk was a mistake. Oregon City's gossips needed no additional fodder. Yet when the congregation dispersed and Zara smiled hesitantly in his direction, his resolve weakened. "I thought perhaps the river path," he suggested as they moved away from the church steps. "It's usually quiet on Sundays." They walked in companionable silence until the town fell behind them and the Willamette River stretched before them, swollen with recent rains. A narrow trail followed its winding course, sheltered by cottonwoods and willows now brilliantly green with new foliage. "It's beautiful here," Zara said, pausing to watch an osprey dive for fish. Different from Portland, but beautiful in its own way. You miss the city, Quinn asked. Sometimes, the bookshops mainly, and anonymity. She smiled wryly. In Portland, neighbors don't track your movements quite so diligently. Small town curiosity, Quinn acknowledged. It can be stifling. Is that why you live so far from town? For privacy, the ranch location was my father's choice. Good water, sheltered valley. He hesitated, then added, but yes, I value the solitude, or did until recently. What changed? Quinn stopped walking, turning to face her. You ask direct questions, Mrs. Wilson. Zara, she corrected softly. If we're having a private conversation away from prying eyes, perhaps we could dispense with formalities. Zara, he repeated, liking how the name felt. And I'm Quinn, though only Hector calls me that these days. Everyone else seems to prefer Ellsworth or that stubborn rancher. She laughed, the sound bright in the quiet afternoon. Stubbornness has its virtues. Without it, you might have abandoned your ranch already. Or adapted sooner, he admitted. I've been resistant to change, even when change was clearly needed. They resumed walking, the path narrowing so that occasionally their arms brushed, sending unexpected awareness through Quinn each time. Tell me about your husband, he said suddenly, surprising himself with the request. If that's not too painful. Zara was quiet so long he feared he'd overstepped, but eventually she replied. Thomas was brilliant, thoughtful, dedicated to becoming a doctor who could serve those most in need. Her voice softened with memory. We met at a lecture on modern medical practices. He was so passionate about improving rural health care. He sounds like a good man. He was. Influenza took him halfway through his studies. She clasped her hands before her. We had 3 years together, not enough, but I'm grateful for them. Quinn absorbed this, understanding her loss in ways most couldn't. My father built our ranch from nothing after my mother died. He poured everything into it, his grief, his hopes, his obsession with creating something permanent. When he passed, I inherited not just land, but a dream I'm not sure was ever truly mine. The confession surprised him. He'd never articulated this thought to anyone, not even Hector. Yet it felt right sharing it with this woman who observed so much and judged so little. Do you want to keep the ranch? She asked. Yes, he answered without hesitation. Not from obligation, though for years I thought that was my only reason. I love the land itself, its challenges and rewards, its rhythms and surprises. He smiled slightly. Even when it's trying to bankrupt me with drought. They reached a fallen log overlooking a bend in the river, sunlight dappling through leaves onto the water's surface. By unspoken agreement, they sat, maintaining a proper distance between them despite the growing ease of their conversation. Quinn, Zara said carefully, there's something I've been considering that might help your water situation further, an irrigation approach from the book that would require several ranches cooperating. Jenkins will never agree to cooperation, Quinn said immediately, especially not now. Perhaps not directly, but what if the idea came through the children? She turned toward him, enthusiasm lighting her features. The school could organize a community project educational for the students but practical for the ranches. A neutral ground where cooperation becomes about the future, not present disagreements. Quinn studied her animated expression, struck by her genuine desire to help. You truly care about this community, don't you? Even though you've been here such a short time. I care about my students and their families. She met his gaze steadily. And yes, I care about this community. I came here seeking purpose, and I've found it not just in teaching, but in belonging somewhere that needs what I can offer, including interfering with stubborn ranchers. He asked, though his tone held no criticism, especially stubborn ranchers who say they don't need help, she replied with a smile that warmed him more than the spring sunshine. They talked for another hour, moving from water management to books they'd both enjoyed, to childhood memories and future hopes. Quinn found himself laughing more than he had in years, drawn by Zara's intelligence and quiet humor. When they finally started back toward town, the afternoon was waning, golden lights slanting through the trees. Neither mentioned meeting again, though the possibility hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. As they approached the outskirts of Oregon City, Quinn reluctantly prepared to restore the public distance propriety demanded. "Thank you for today," he said formally as the first houses came into view. Zara nodded, understanding the shift. "I enjoyed our conversation, Mr. Ellsworth." "As did I, Mrs. Wilson." He tipped his hat and turned toward the livery where he'd left his horse, already anticipating when he might reasonably see her again. The next weeks brought significant changes to Quinn's ranch and to Oregon City itself. The spring rains, while welcome, proved insufficient to fully break the drought. Water conservation became the town's primary concern, with Quinn's check dams attracting attention from neighboring ranchers. True to her word, Zara organized a school project on irrigation systems, inviting parents and community members to a presentation where students demonstrated models of various approaches. Quinn attended, noting that even Bernard Jenkins listened with grudging interest as his own son explained a technique from ancient Persia. Unexpectedly, it was Horace Miller who approached Quinn afterward. "Fascinating concepts these children are learning, makes a man think about untapped potential." Quinn regarded him warily. "What potential would that be?" "Cooperation, my good man." Miller lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Jenkins is being short-sighted about the water situation, but what if several ranches pooled resources to implement a comprehensive system? Property values would rise for everyone involved." "You're suggesting a water cooperative?" Quinn asked, surprised by the businessman's apparent reversal. "I'm suggesting progress requires innovation, and innovation often requires new perspectives." Miller nodded significantly toward Zara, who was speaking with several mothers across the room. "That schoolteacher has the right idea, even if her methods are unorthodox." The conversation planted a seed in Quinn's mind that germinated over subsequent days. He found himself riding to neighboring properties, discussing water rights and management in terms of mutual benefit rather than competition. To his surprise, most ranchers responded positively, their common struggle against drought outweighing personal differences. Only Bernard Jenkins remained obstinate, his threatened dam becoming a symbol of resistance to change. Tension mounted as water levels dropped again, until one June morning when Hector galloped into the ranch yard, his expression grave. "Jenkins has men working on the dam," he reported breathlessly. "Started at dawn. They're already diverting water." Quinn's first instinct was confrontation, gathering men, riding to the boundary, demanding Jenkins cease or face consequences. But Zara's influence had him considering alternatives. "Saddle my horse," he said instead. "I'm riding to town." An hour later, Quinn stood before Oregon City's hastily assembled town council, presenting a formal complaint and proposed solution. The meeting, held in the schoolhouse for space, drew nearly every adult in the community. "Water rights have been established by territorial law and decades of practice," Quinn explained, his voice carrying to the back of the crowded room. "Jenkins Dam violates both. But rather than escalate this into a conflict none of us needs, I'm proposing we establish a water management cooperative." He unrolled a map on Zara's desk, now serving as the council table. "Each ranch would maintain proportional access based on historical usage, but we'd implement conservation methods collectively. The irrigation system would be built and maintained through shared labor and resources." "Sounds like socialism," Jenkins muttered from his seat. "Sounds like common sense," countered another rancher. "My grandfather fought similar battles in Nebraska. Individual solutions fail when the problem affects everyone." Discussion erupted, passionate but largely constructive. Quinn found himself mediating between factions, explaining technical details, addressing concerns roles he'd never imagined himself filling. Occasionally his eyes met Zara's, her quiet pride fueling his determination. By meeting's end, a majority had agreed to the cooperative approach. Even Jenkins, facing overwhelming community sentiment, reluctantly conceded to removing his partially constructed dam in exchange for guaranteed water rights within the new system. As people filed out, Quinn found himself standing alone with Zara in the emptying classroom. "That was impressive leadership," she said softly. "I had an exemplary teacher," he replied, holding her gaze until color rose in her cheeks. The book merely provided information. You applied it effectively. I wasn't referring to the book. His voice lowered. You've changed how I see things, Zara. Cooperation instead of isolation. Community instead of self-reliance alone. The schoolroom door opened before she could respond, and Edwin Carpenter entered, still discussing details with another council member. The moment between them passed, but something had shifted, an acknowledgement of feelings growing beyond friendship or mutual respect. The water cooperative transformed Oregon City's summer. Instead of conflict, the community rallied around construction projects designed by Quinn based on techniques from Zara's books and local knowledge. Irrigation channels followed contours of the land, maximizing efficiency. Storage ponds collected rainfall for later distribution. Weekend work parties brought neighbors together, sharing labor, meals, and gradually, trust. Quinn found himself at the center of this transformation, his natural leadership abilities finally expressed beyond his own property lines. His ranch benefited from the improved water access, but more significantly, the cooperative approach reduced his isolation, connecting him to the community in ways his father never had been. Through it all, his relationship with Zara developed in careful, measured increments. Their conversations, initially focused on water management and community projects, gradually expanded to include personal hopes and private thoughts. They maintained public propriety, always meeting in open settings, often with others present, yet an undeniable intimacy grew between them. By midsummer, the bank had extended Quinn's loan based on the ranch's improved prospects. The threat of foreclosure receded, though complete recovery would require at least another season of normal rainfall. Still, for the first time in years, Quinn found himself planning for the future rather than merely surviving the present. On a warm August evening, he sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in spectacular hues. The day's work was done, cattle settled in healthier pastures than the spring had promised, the revived creek gurgling contentedly through the property. Contentment filled him, yet restlessness lingered beneath it, a sense of something still incomplete. "Beautiful evening, patron," Hector commented, joining him with 2 cups of coffee. "Ranch is looking better than it has in years." Quinn accepted the coffee gratefully. "We were lucky with the rain." "Lucky with more than rain," Hector observed mildly. "Lucky with good neighbors finally working together. Lucky with a schoolteacher who knows more than just reading and writing." Quinn gave his foreman a sidelong glance. "You're not subtle, Hector, never claimed to be." The older man sipped his coffee. "Mrs. Wilson asks about you when Sophia brings home books. Always very proper questions about the ranch, the cooperative, but a man notices things." "What things?" Quinn asked despite himself. "The way her eyes brighten when your name is mentioned, the special book she sends specifically for you." Hector shrugged. Small things that mean something to those paying attention. Quinn stared into the darkening landscape, emotions he'd kept carefully controlled surging to the surface. She's respected here now. A relationship with a rancher of questionable prospects could damage that. "A woman who chooses her own path doesn't worry so much about what others think," Hector replied. "And your prospects aren't so questionable anymore, patron." The conversation lingered in Quinn's thoughts throughout the night and into the next morning as he rode to town for a cooperative meeting. Oregon City had transformed over the summer, new businesses opening, homes being repaired, a general air of optimism replacing the desperation of spring. The water project had catalyzed broader cooperation, revitalizing the community's spirit along with its resources. The meeting, held as usual in the schoolhouse after classes, focused on expanding the irrigation system to smaller properties surrounding the town. Quinn presented projections for water usage through fall, noting with satisfaction that even with conservative rainfall estimates, the cooperative had secured sufficient resources for all members. "Excellent work, Ellsworth," commented Horace Miller, who had become an unexpected ally in the project. "This community owes you a debt of gratitude." "The concept was collaborative," Quinn replied, uncomfortable with personal recognition. "And much of the technical knowledge came from Mrs. Wilson's research." Heads turned toward Zara, who sat near the back taking notes. She smiled modestly. I merely provided information. Mr. Ellsworth and the ranchers did the actual implementation. After the meeting adjourned, Quinn found himself lingering, arranging papers while others filed out. Zara remained as well, erasing diagrams from the blackboard. When the door finally closed behind the last council member, they were alone in the quiet classroom. The cooperative is thriving, she said, breaking the silence. You should be proud. We should be proud, he corrected, moving closer. Without you, I'd still be fighting neighbors over water rights instead of working with them. She turned to face him, chalk dust on her hands and a smudge on her cheek that he resisted the urge to brush away. You give me too much credit. The drought forced everyone to reconsider old approaches. Not everyone, Quinn said softly. Some of us needed additional persuasion. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Quinn knew he stood at a crossroads: continue their careful friendship or acknowledge the deeper emotions that had been growing all summer. Zara, he began, his voice lower than intended. I find myself thinking of you at odd moments, when the sunrise hits the eastern pasture, when Sophia brings home a new book you've recommended, when difficult decisions arise and I wonder what perspective you might offer. Color rose in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. I think of you too, more than is probably proper for a schoolteacher. Propriety has its place, Quinn said, moving closer still, but so does honesty between two people who. He hesitated, then finished, who care for one another. Is that what we do, Quinn, care for one another? Her voice held a vulnerability that touched him deeply. I believe we do, at least I know I care for you. He took a deep breath. More than I expected, more than I thought possible after years of focusing solely on the ranch. Zara's eyes softened. And I care for you, though I never planned to find such feelings here in Oregon City. Quinn's hand moved of its own accord, finally brushing away the chalk smudge from her cheek. The simple contact sent warmth coursing through him. Plans have a way of changing. Sometimes for the better. Yes, she whispered, her eyes never leaving his. They do. The moment hung between them, possibility stretching into certainty. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, Quinn leaned forward. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but deepened as Zara responded, her hand coming to rest lightly on his chest. When they parted, Quinn was breathing as if he'd run miles. I should apologize for taking such a liberty, but I find I can't regret it. Nor can I, Zara admitted, her smile radiant despite her obvious effort to maintain composure. Though I'm not sure what happens next. Traditionally, I believe I'm supposed to court you properly, Quinn said, returning her smile, if you're amenable to such attention. I believe I would be, she replied with a hint of mischief. Though Oregon City will certainly talk. Let them, Quinn said with newfound confidence. We've given them plenty to talk about already with the water cooperative. What's a courtship compared to revolutionizing local agriculture? Her laughter filled the classroom, bright and uninhibited. When you put it that way, it seems almost mundane. Nothing about you could ever be mundane, Zara Wilson. He took her hand gently. May I call on you Sunday after church, perhaps another walk by the river? I'd like that very much, she replied, squeezing his hand before releasing it as footsteps approached the schoolhouse door. The following weeks transformed their relationship from private understanding to public courtship. Quinn called formally at the schoolhouse on Sundays, escorted Zara to community gatherings, and joined her for meals at the hotel restaurant, where curious eyes observed their growing closeness. Gossip flourished initially. The stubborn rancher and the educated widow made an unexpected pair, but gradually gave way to acceptance as their compatibility became evident. Quinn's standing in the community had risen through his leadership of the water cooperative, while Zara's dedication to her students had earned respect even from initial skeptics like Bernard Jenkins. On a crisp September evening, with harvest underway throughout the valley, Quinn invited Zara to dinner at the ranch. Hector and his wife Maria prepared a feast, while Sophia proudly showed her teacher around the property, chattering about improvements made through the summer. And Mr. Quinn built this bench specially so we can watch the sunset, the girl explained, leading Zara to a rustic seat positioned to capture the western view. He says it's the best spot on the whole ranch. It's beautiful, Zara agreed, taking in the golden light washing over pastures where cattle grazed contentedly. The drought's effects remained visible in places, but recovery was evident everywhere in greening fields, the steady creek flow, and thriving gardens near the main house. "I'm glad you like it," came Quinn's voice as he approached. "It's my favorite place to think." Sophia, perceptive beyond her years, made a transparent excuse about helping her mother and scampered off, leaving them alone. "Your home is lovely, Quinn," Zara said as he joined her on the bench. "I can see why you fought so hard to save it. It's changed since you entered our lives," he replied, taking her hand naturally, no longer concerned with who might see. "Not just the water systems, but everything. There's hope here again, purpose beyond mere survival." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun descended toward distant mountains, painting the sky in spectacular oranges and purples. Quinn found himself imagining Zara here permanently, her books filling empty shelves in the main house, her voice bringing warmth to rooms that had known only masculine practicality for too long, her perspective broadening his own daily. "I love you, Zara," he said simply, the words emerging without premeditation but with absolute certainty. She turned to him, eyes wide with surprise, then softening with emotion. "And I love you, Quinn, though I never expected to find such feelings again, especially here." He shifted to face her fully. "I had a speech prepared for later after dinner, something about gradual realizations and proper timing, but sitting here seeing you in this place that means everything to me, I couldn't wait. A speech." She asked, eyes twinkling despite the tears gathering in them, along with a question. Quinn reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small box. "One I hope you'll answer favorably, despite my impatience." Zara's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a modest ring with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," Quinn explained. "Simple but given with complete devotion, like what I'm offering you, Quinn." She whispered, emotion making further words impossible. "Zara Wilson, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of joining your life, your knowledge, your future with mine?" Tears spilled freely now, though her smile was radiant. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger as if destined to be there. Their kiss, framed by the spectacular sunset, sealed promises both spoken and unspoken of partnership, respect, and love that had grown from the most unexpected beginnings. Dinner that evening became an impromptu celebration when Quinn announced their engagement. Hector produced a bottle of Spanish wine saved for special occasions, while Maria embraced Zara with tears and rapid Spanish blessings. Sophia danced around the kitchen, delighted that her beloved teacher would become a permanent part of her world. As autumn deepened into winter, wedding preparations occupied Oregon City almost as thoroughly as the water cooperative had during summer. The community embraced the union wholeheartedly, recognizing how both participants had contributed to their collective well-being. The ceremony took place on the first Sunday of December, 1876, with snow dusting the ground and clear skies overhead. The small church overflowed with well-wishers, ranchers and townspeople, students and their families, even Bernard Jenkins and his wife, their former animosity dissolved through months of successful cooperation. Zara wore a gown of deep green velvet, chosen to match her eyes rather than follow tradition. Quinn, more nervous than he'd ever been facing drought or financial ruin, waited at the altar in a new suit, watching in wonder as she walked toward him on Edwin Carpenter's arm. Their vows, written together over quiet evenings, spoke of partnership, respect, and the courage to help without being asked. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers that seemed to celebrate not just their union but the community's own revival. The reception at the hotel featured food from every family in Oregon City, a potluck feast that represented the diverse backgrounds and shared future of the region. Children darted between tables while adults reminisced about the dramatic changes of the past year. "To think it all started with a schoolbook about water conservation," Mabel Carpenter mused to Zara as they watched Quinn deep in conversation with several ranchers. Who could have predicted where that would lead? Life rarely follows the paths we expect, Zara replied, touching her wedding ring with quiet joy. Sometimes the detours bring us exactly where we need to be. Later, as they prepared to depart for a brief honeymoon in Portland, Quinn helped Zara into the decorated wagon that would carry them to the train station. Snow was falling again, soft flakes catching in her hair and on her eyelashes. "Any regrets, Mrs. Ellsworth?" He asked quietly, wrapping a blanket around her against the chill. "Only that we took so long to recognize what was happening between us," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "All those conversations about water systems when we might have been discussing more interesting topics." Quinn laughed, the sound carrying across the snowy town square. "I believe those water conversations were precisely what we needed. They taught me to listen, to consider new ideas, to accept help without seeing it as weakness. And they taught me that stubbornness can be a virtue when directed toward worthy goals," Zara added, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "Though I maintain you're still excessively self-reliant." "No longer," Quinn assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I have a partner now, remember. One who helps without waiting to be asked. And one who sometimes needs reminding that asking for help is permitted," she countered affectionately. As they drove away amid cheers and good wishes, Quinn reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them together. From drought to abundance, from isolation to community, from resistance to acceptance, the transformations extended far beyond water systems and agricultural techniques. "I love you," he said, words that had once seemed impossible to speak now flowing easily. "Thank you for teaching this stubborn rancher that independence and interdependence aren't mutually exclusive." "And I love you," Zara replied, resting her head on his shoulder as Oregon City faded behind them and their shared future opened before them like the snow-covered landscape unmarked, full of possibility and infinitely beautiful in its promise. 5 years later, the Ellsworth Ranch stood transformed. Its boundaries extended through careful acquisition of adjacent properties. Its operations diversified beyond cattle to include orchards and specialty crops made possible by the irrigation systems that had saved the community during the drought of '76. The main house, once a masculine bachelor's domain, now bustled with life. Quinn's office overflowed with agricultural journals and correspondence from farmers throughout the territory seeking advice on water management. The parlor, renovated and brightened, featured floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with Zara's collection, now expanded through Quinn's regular gifts, and running through the house came the sound that had once been unimaginable children's laughter. 3-year-old Thomas, named for Zara's first husband with a generosity of spirit that typified their marriage, chased his 18-month-old sister Lillian through wide hallways. Zara, her figure just beginning to show signs of their third child, watched from the kitchen doorway, love and contentment evident in her expression. "Papa's home," Thomas called, spotting Quinn's approach through the window. Both children raced to the porch, squealing with excitement as their father dismounted. Quinn swept them up, one in each arm, marveling as always at the miracle of their existence. "Have you been good for your mother?" he asked, carrying them inside. "Thomas helped collect eggs without breaking any," Zara reported, accepting Quinn's kiss. "And Lily actually napped today, which is something of a miracle. Excellent work, both of you." Quinn set the children down, producing small wooden animals from his pocket Hector's latest carvings for his honorary grandchildren. As they scampered off to play, he drew Zara into a proper embrace. "And how are you feeling today?" "Wonderful," she assured him, placing his hand on her slightly rounded belly. "Though your son or daughter seems to be practicing horseback riding already." Quinn smiled at the description. Their family's growth mirrored Oregon City's own expansion. The water cooperative had evolved into a model studied by other communities facing similar challenges. The school, now with 3 teachers including Zara who taught advanced students 3 days weekly, had gained regional recognition for innovative education that blended practical knowledge with academic subjects. "Hector says the north pasture is ready for rotation," Quinn reported, following Zara to the kitchen where Maria was preparing dinner. And the new irrigation channel is working perfectly. We'll increase production by at least 15% next season. Excellent, Zara said. Perhaps we can finally add that science laboratory to the school budget. Their partnership extended seamlessly from family to community affairs, each supporting the other's priorities while maintaining their individual interests. Quinn served on the Territorial Agricultural Board, while Zara had helped establish Oregon City's first public library alongside her teaching duties. That evening, with children bathed and tucked into bed with stories, Quinn and Zara sat on the porch bench that had witnessed his proposal years before. The ranch spread before them, peaceful in twilight, cattle moving slowly toward the barn for evening milking. "I had a letter from Rebecca today," Zara mentioned, referring to her sister-in-law in Portland. "She's finally considering our invitation to visit. I think Thomas's stories about his Wild West adventures have intrigued her." Quinn chuckled, his arm comfortable around his wife's shoulders. "Wild West indeed. Our biggest adventure lately was when Lily decided to feed the chickens her oatmeal. She's determined, that one, like her father." Zara nestled closer against the evening chill. Rebecca mentioned something else interesting. "The medical school Thomas attended is establishing a rural physician program sending doctors to communities that can't support a full-time practice." "You're thinking of Oregon City," Quinn guessed, knowing his wife's mind as well as his own after 5 years of marriage. "We've grown enough to perhaps attract a circuit doctor. It would mean children wouldn't have to travel to Portland for proper care." She hesitated. "It feels like completing something Thomas started, bringing medical knowledge to rural communities." Quinn tightened his embrace, understanding the significance. "It's a worthy goal. The cooperative model could work for healthcare just as it did for water. Shared resources making something possible that no single family or town could support alone." "Exactly my thinking," Zara said, turning to face him with the enthusiasm that still captivated him daily. "We could start with quarterly visits, perhaps grow to monthly if surrounding areas participated." They discussed logistics as darkness fell, their conversation flowing with the easy rhythm of partners accustomed to building ideas together. Eventually, they fell silent, content in each other's company beneath an emerging canopy of stars. "Did you ever imagine this?" Zara asked softly. "That day when you rode through the rain to return my book, that we'd be here with children planning rural health care programs?" Quinn considered the question seriously. "No," he admitted. "I couldn't imagine beyond saving the ranch, surviving one more season." "You taught me to look further, to see possibilities instead of limitations. You've taught me equally valuable lessons," she countered. "About perseverance, about commitment to place and people, about finding depth where others might see only simplicity." Their lips met in a kiss that held the familiarity of years together, yet retained the spark that had surprised them both that afternoon in the schoolhouse. When they parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered, "for helping without asking. For seeing what I needed before I knew myself." "And thank you," she replied, "for eventually accepting that help doesn't diminish strength, it multiplies it." Inside the house, a child's voice called sleepily. They rose together, hand in hand, to attend to their family, a partnership formed from unlikely beginnings, strengthened through challenge and flourishing in the fertile ground of mutual respect and enduring love. As they moved through their home, Quinn reflected on how thoroughly Zara had transformed his life, not by changing who he was, but by expanding his vision of what was possible. The stubborn rancher and the determined widow had found in each other not just romance, but a shared purpose greater than either could have achieved alone. And in Oregon City, their story became part of local lore, how drought and determination, books and practicality, independence and community had combined to create something lasting and valuable. Future generations would learn of the water cooperative that saved the region, not realizing it began with a simple exchange between two unlikely allies. "We don't need help. Then let me help without asking." Words that had changed everything, proving that sometimes the most powerful assistance comes not in answering spoken needs, but in recognizing the unvoiced ones that truly matter.